Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reacting to why big tech is collapsing, the coming big tech crisis by Moon. So yeah, let's get started. But before that, remember to subscribe and smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm, because why not? It will make my day. So yeah, let's get started.
Silicon Valley is in chaos. Almost all of the major big tech companies are collapsing. For example, Meta was worth over $1 trillion in 2021, but just a year later, and their value has dropped by 2/3.
Wow.
And the other giants aren't far
mad.
behind. Amazon, Meta, Twitter, Tesla, Netflix have all seen massive revenue drops, and the scale of these losses is unprecedented, especially
And all
considering
of these
big tech has
companies are
been so
based in
unstoppable
America,
for the
so
last
their whole
decade. In
economy
fact,
will
revenues and
collapse.
profits were
It's going down as well.
skyrocketing. Silicon Valley was a billionaire factory, with some of the most prolific billionaires building their names and their bank accounts on the back of big tech companies. Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, all of them were created by the massive tech boom of the last 4 decades. But then the bubble popped, and now the biggest names in Silicon Valley are seeing their revenue plummet, firing hundreds of thousands of employees, with the stock value of almost every big tech company falling dramatically. Which leads us to the
That's mad.
question, how did it get this bad so
Like all
quickly?
of the
Well, you see,
people's life
tech
is
was a
changing,
growing
right?
part of the world's economy for years. Over the last decade, tech
I suppose
companies
because of
have only grown
COVID,
larger and
everything's
larger.
changed.
And of course there were ups and
And
downs.
because of
For
remote
example, the
work and
dot-com
AI.
crash of the late 90s proved the catastrophic consequences of overvaluing tech companies. However, over time, the industry always picked up again. It was a measured climb at first, but soon people forgot the mistakes of the past, and as the years rolled by and technology improved, the companies behind it grew richer and richer. But there were massive problems on the horizon for Silicon Valley, because the path wasn't all golden. For example, companies like Uber have coasted on their potential, hoovering up investments without a proper model for profitability. The same can be said for Twitter, and yet despite this, all of the giants of the industry grew to immense
Twitter's
proportions on paper.
going mad as
For
well now,
example, in
like, it's being
2018,
run by
Meta
Elon
surpassed
Musk, and
$500
I don't know
billion
what's
in
happening
net
with that.
worth, and Amazon were closing in on a trillion. But
And also, like, Meta is also investing, like, I think it's like 99% of its profit into like the AR, like augmented reality, right? Which is insane as well. No, not augmented reality, VR, I meant virtual reality, because of the Meta headsets, so like the Quest and the Quest 2. So yeah.
these companies had a similar problem. They just weren't worth what people thought they were. Their business models were shaky and in constant need of investment, or they just didn't make that much money to begin with. Their margins were always incredibly
Also,
tight,
it's just because of
and that's why almost all of these tech
evaluation.
billionaires never look at the stock
Don't know.
price.
That whole period is very interesting because the stock is not the company, and the company is not the stock. And so as I watched the stock fall from 113 to 6, I was also watching all of our internal business metrics. Every single thing about the business was getting better and fast.
Because they believed as their technology spread into every aspect of the world, the companies would always ride the wave of future potential. Their shaky business model just didn't appear to be an issue at
Sundar
this point.
Pichai.
All these big tech companies were gaining more and more power, and it seemed like they were untouchable. Because big tech had something invaluable, the eyeballs and data of the entire world. You see, ever since they started pulling in user data at the massive levels they do now, social media companies were then further driven to maximize their engagement, keeping people on their app for as long as possible. And often as possible became the most important thing, which is why we're all so addicted to our phones and our laptops. It makes all of these
Which
big
is
tech
also bad.
companies billions of dollars, allowing them to sell more and more ads and exploit more and more of your data. And over time, these companies perfected this process by manipulating psychology, making the apps so addictive that the entire world couldn't live without their smartphone. And during this process, they found out that anger and fear are some of the best ways to keep people engaged. And so as the algorithms were fine-tuned for engagement, they pushed more extreme and more provocative posts above everything else, putting them in front of everyone's faces constantly,
This is
all
teaching
while
the wrong thing,
censoring
right?
any information that didn't fit into Silicon Valley's political narrative. Which is why Twitter, Meta, and all these other companies became the breeding ground for social media addiction, censorship, and hatred. And as time went on, the cycle ramped up and the culture war worsened. And these changes in the online space were reflected in the real world, leading to riots, unrest, and collapse. It didn't matter to the tech companies though. In fact,
And
this
the
was in
thing
their
is,
interest. And
even
instead of
with,
tackling
like,
the problems that they had caused themselves with,
even with like was it like with a single post, the whole currency could change. Like, remember when Elon Musk was posting about Bitcoin? When he posted something, it would increase. And like, for example, when he said that Tesla will start accepting cryptocurrency, then the Bitcoin and all cryptocurrencies start skyrocketing. And like with a single tweet, he has the power to control the whole economy, which is insane. And that's how social media is so powerful.
algorithms, companies started to then lean further on censorship, suppressing all counter opinions in the name of misinformation. But this solution wouldn't work forever. Tech companies were going to pay the cost for their meddling in public discourse. However, for now, they had to deal with a much more conventional problem: competition. Over the past decade, China has
That's the main
exploded
issue, right?
into the
With every
technology
company,
industry.
it's that
Companies like
competition.
Tencent, Huawei, and ByteDance have been eating into the Western market share on a global scale. In fact, Tencent has made numerous takeovers of Western companies like Riot, Epic Games, and even Ubisoft. And through these moves, they've undermined Western dominance in the lucrative gaming industry, with China owning some of the most popular games today like Fortnite and League of Legends. And China's also taking over with things like TikTok and Tencent's
TikTok
investments
is
in
going
Reddit
on.
and Discord.
Like during
And then
COVID, it
Huawei
was
attacked hardware manufacturers,
going
releasing
insane.
cheaper alternatives
Like
loaded
in
with
nowadays,
Chinese data
everyone,
collection
like
technology.
9 out of 10
Xiaomi did the
people's
same,
phone has
but to even
TikTok
greater
installed,
effect. Despite
which is
only
crazy
being
to think
founded in
about.
2010, they've gained over 12% of the market already. And ByteDance is probably the most sinister. I mean, China was well aware of the disruptive powers of social media long before the West had any idea, and they studied what the Western companies were doing with engagement and turned it into an art form. With TikTok exploding in popularity by playing on Silicon Valley's addictive business model, and by learning from Silicon Valley's successes and mistakes, TikTok has grown by 400% every single year, seizing
That's
Western
mad.
social media companies' audiences from under their noses. Which is why almost every major app has now adopted TikTok's short
So,
video
like,
model.
YouTube
And to put it
Shorts,
plainly, this is a
because
targeted
it's
attack on
influenced
Silicon
by
Valley.
TikTok,
All
right?
these companies have incredibly
the idea
close
of that short
relationships with the
form
CCP,
content.
which has given them enormous room to scale up. Because no matter how profitable these companies are, they've always got the Chinese government behind their back. And this gives them a massive advantage over the West. They don't have to deal with pesky human rights laws, ethical impediments, or even profitability. Instead, they can be safe in the knowledge that as long as they pull the party line, they can get away with virtually anything. And this isn't just within China, this is everywhere. They get government backing abroad, as all of these Chinese big social media sites are practically a third party of the Chinese government. And as they work in tandem, these companies have become an unstoppable force. And so whilst the Western tech companies are always at each other's throats, China's tech giants have been allowed to build their monopolies in peace. Which is why every day, China gains a little more ground on the West. Because for every user and
That's
customer
true.
that China gains, Silicon Valley gets weaker. And this new threat has been awful for big tech's bottom lines, and the true consequences have only just begun today. These problems were still on the horizon, but they hadn't affected the numbers yet. Apps like TikTok were only just getting started and massive growth was still expected. And by the end of 2016, some journalists were hailing Silicon Valley as the future. They said this because something dramatic had changed. The list of the top companies used to always be dominated by oil and manufacturing, and a few financial giants that relied on their sheer scale to dominate. But these companies had now been replaced by Google, Amazon, Tesla, Apple, and Microsoft, pushing out the old guard. However, despite their immense valuations, these companies still weren't nearly as profitable as they should have been. From 1995 to 2015, Amazon only made $2 billion in profit, despite the company approaching $1 trillion net worth.
Yeah,
Now, yes,
how
this move
how
was
is that
meant to dodge
possible?
taxes, yet it still portrayed a significant disconnect between Silicon Valley and the rest of the world. Rather than focusing on profitability, Silicon Valley companies were much more focused on growth, and the best example of this is Uber. You see, Uber spent years focused entirely on growth above anything else. They embodied the Silicon Valley mantra, breaking laws in industries to cement themselves in the market. With a massive leak showing that Uber executives were shown instructing their employees to use chaos and violence to uproot the taxi industry and put pressure on governments. And of course, they had big problems with actually making enough money. I mean, their business model still has incredibly low margins, even after they started to squeeze every penny they could and raising all of their prices, which has caused Uber to be in a worrying situation. With market saturation, their stock price is plummeting, and the company's dreams of market dominance are now fading into the ground. But Uber does still have a slight chance, as Silicon Valley overconfidence has led to way more destructive collapses, specifically in the case of WeWork. In early 2019, WeWork was seen as an innovative new company that was set to change the world of work. Although it was founded in New York, the Silicon Valley mentality had definitely gotten to its founder, Adam Neumann. The charismatic CEO was so good at convincing investors that he pulled in billions. And only a few years after its founding, the company had raised over $1 billion for their office space
Well,
company.
that's
And I
nice.
say
For
office
a
space
start,
company,
though.
but WeWork was still listed as a tech company. And so WeWork managed to raise over $1 billion for the company, and this was despite mass layoffs at the company and poor financial performance, because simply enough, investors were just in love with the idea, rather than the product in front of them. In fact, WeWork lost over $2 billion in 2018, and yet
Wow.
the hype continued. Analysis stated that the company was now worth over $40 billion. This was more than giants like Airbnb, and by September, the company attempted to gain even more investor money, beginning the process of an IPO or initial public offering, and this would open the shares of the company to the public, raising even further billions for WeWork. And yet even with this enormous amount of investment, the IPO started to gain scrutiny as investors started to see that the company was really making no money, and it portrayed the
That's
true
the problem,
reality of the
right?
Silicon Valley business model. Massive debt and
If
low
the
revenue
longevity
propped up
is
by other
bad, then
people's
you won't
money. And so
last.
their $40 billion valuation was cut by 3/4 in a matter of
Wow.
days, resulting in 20% of the company being fired. And Newman, their CEO, and other executives were
bad.
all forced to
All
resign,
the people
and the
who
company was
invested
forced to
have
cut
just
back on its
lost like
massive
75%.
growth plans. Reality hit the company hard, and today people are questioning the expiry date of WeWork. But yet again, Silicon Valley didn't learn from this example. Despite the very same business practices being used across tons of tech companies, this was just seen as an isolated case by tech elites. Besides, now wasn't the time to consolidate and slow down. And then as 2019 came and went, the world was forced into the pandemic.
First US case has been detected.
This caused
There's
a
confirmation the
massive dump,
coronavirus
right?
has reached Australia.
The
It
whole
was here that
economy
tech
of the
companies would
world.
double down. COVID-19, as it was for so many other billionaires and corporations, was a massive opportunity for big tech. The pandemic saw tech companies' values rise by hundreds of billions. They made so much money, they barely even knew what to do with it. And it was the belief at the top of these companies that this is just how things were. Tech dominance into the future seemed all but guaranteed. Zuckerberg and others would be risky and short-sighted in their investments, assuming that revenue levels would stay strong after the pandemic. And that's why Meta's workforce grew by 28% in just
That's
a
what I'm
year,
saying,
and Amazon
yeah.
massively expanded
But
their
now
own
he's
operations,
cutting it by
seeing
like
their profits soar
50%
by
or
over
something, right?
220%. Apple spent an extra $90 billion just buying back their own stock during the pandemic, betting an amount worth more than the GDP of Sri Lanka on their continued success. You see, tech companies made massive investments into themselves, betting that the good times would never end, and it was this overconfidence that meant that when their profits finally did start to slow down, they wouldn't be able to cope with it. But overconfidence wasn't the only problem that worsened during the pandemic. You see, the culture war was getting more and more intense as people spent more time online. Unwinnable arguments raged as people's lives
But they
were
have nothing to
immeasurably
do
worse.
because they've
And
just
whilst the
been stuck at
pandemic
home,
was
right?
lucrative for
Due
tech
to
companies,
lockdowns,
they were
so
some of the
the
only
only thing they
winners,
could do
with
is to
lockdowns
browse
completely
the internet.
destroying the economy, putting millions out of jobs and businesses out of business.
So
And it's
online
impossible to measure
creators,
the
the
negative
real
effects of the
winners,
pandemic on
think
people
about-
and their mental health.
or any
However,
digital
what was
creators.
measurable was the heating up of the culture
could be
war, and
consumed
eventually the
digitally
result of this would be
and
social
easier
media fatigue. People were just
spread.
sick of the culture war, and China was now also closing in on
And the
Silicon
actual
Valley,
target
as over the
audience is, like,
pandemic, TikTok
increased
grew by
dramatically.
hundreds of millions of users, surpassing 1.1 billion in 2021. However, all of these combining factors hadn't affected big tech yet, but it would only be a matter of time. Meanwhile, the tech billionaires were enjoying their moments in the sun. Jeff Bezos spent millions on a personal space trip, whilst Elon Musk became Times Person of the Year for 2021.
rich.
But all of this would
Rich
turn out to
people
be
don't know
some of the
what to do
last
with their
good
money.
news these tech billionaires had, as once the world finally opened up again, it signaled the end of Silicon Valley's boom, even if no one believed it. For example, at Meta, revenue growth had risen to over 50% in the summer of 2021, but it dropped sharply over the next 9 months, falling to just 5% by the first quarter of 2022. Amazon also saw a
So
sharp
they only
decline
made a
from over
5%.
40% to around 7% in the same time span. Even usually stable companies like Microsoft or Apple suffered the same fate, seeing their growth levels fall off. So what happened here? Well, all of the growing problems that Silicon Valley thought they could ignore were finally making their mark. And whilst they had been shielded from the pandemic recession by artificial demand, that was all over now, and the economy was only getting worse. So people began to spend much less on products. People didn't care about ads. Essentials became more expensive, so people had less disposable income. Services saw a boost as well, as people made up for the lost time. And on top of this, the culture war had burned tons of
So the
people out
living
as
cost
well,
has
leading to less
increased. That's
usage
the
of
main
social
issue, right?
media.
That's the
A
number
Canadian
one issue.
survey found that less people were using Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter in 2022 than in 2020. And the only tech company that was spared from the decline was TikTok. Their growth was unimpeded, maybe because they're artificially propped up by the Chinese government. But it was clear
TikTok
for everyone in
is
Silicon Valley that they were
mad.
losing their audience's attention. And with this dramatic reduction in attention came dramatic cuts in their profits. And this is when the crack started to show. Tech companies had become so focused on growth that when it dried up, it hit them much harder than other industries. Over the course of 2022, tech companies
Yeah,
lost
it's
more and
just
more
layoff,
money,
right?
leading
That's
to
the
their
problem.
CEOs to make some
If they
erratic decisions.
overpredict,
Musk took over as
hired
CEO
too
of
many
Twitter
people
after years of negotiations and
during
legal
COVID.
battles.
Now,
He started off by firing
because
large
of
parts
loss,
of the
they can't
workforce, leading to
make
massive
profit.
technical glitches and problems with the app. Things were going so badly that he was forced to resign from the company. Google had put much of their focus on their new Stadia cloud console, but as with every other big tech company, 2022
Stadia's
also saw its demise, being forced to refund everyone who bought it without Google actually getting the products back. Additionally, Uber saw a sharp decline in their business, to ruthless competition, massive leaks, and higher prices. Meta stock value dropped by around 60%, with Tesla's dropping by 70%. So once 2022 was nearing its end, tech companies realized it wasn't going to get any better anytime
Well,
soon.
Tesla is
They
also
needed to cut
entirely on
costs,
Musk, so
which
it's
is
the
why you started to
actual
see
name, right?
articles of these big
And
tech
because of
companies
what
firing
he
tens
did
of
with
thousands
Twitter,
of workers,
it could affect
like with
like every
Microsoft
other
firing over 1,000
business
employees,
that's
then
owned by
Stripe, a
Elon
growing
Musk.
startup, letting go off 14% of their workforce. Elon was forced to lay off nearly 4,000 people from Twitter, with Meta following shortly after, laying off a further 11,000
And especially
people.
during these
Amazon
crucial
cut their
times
numbers by
when like the
10,000,
living cost is
and all
so
of this
high.
has happened in just
And
over
this
a
all
month.
happening
Eventually, Amazon would double their numbers in December, as clearly they
being
hadn't
laid
shrunk
off is,
enough.
like, the worst
And
thing
these
that
weren't
could
minimum
happen.
wage employees either. They were both high-skilled and incredibly expensive employees. And in total, over 1,000 tech companies fired over 150,000 workers. But Silicon Valley had made their bed with their risky investments and growth-focused ethos. The same companies that had fought over these workers in the talent wars, which was just a year or two ago, were now letting them go and incurring massive costs in the process. And it wasn't just going to cost them at the time either. These firing sprees represent a massive amount of people with incredibly valuable skills. A job board called Tech Jobs for Good has seen massive increases in skilled job seekers off of the back of these layoffs. People who have seen the fast life of big tech companies are now instead looking to make a difference despite a small hit to their paychecks. And this is one of the ways in which the collapse of big tech will inadvertently benefit the world. But perhaps this is symptomatic of a much larger trend in our economy. As going into 2023, with the UN predicting we're going to be in a massive recession, it seems like Silicon Valley can only expect more and more suffering. The future looks grim. Ad buys are low, which has hurt all of the social media companies like Meta, and supply chain issues are now threatening hardware companies like Apple and Microsoft. Governments are also now souring on big tech, seeing their influence as destabilizing. Microsoft's $69 billion acquisition
right?
deal for Activision and
When you
Blizzard
actually
is being debated by
considering, like, the
monopoly
numbers.
watchdogs around the world. The FTC has already tried to block it. Meanwhile, the whole tech industry is waiting for another court verdict on recommendation algorithms. Google is being sued for recommending videos made by terrorists, which then incited an attack
Whoa,
in
I
France.
didn't know
And
about
if
that.
they're found liable, this will upend years of legal doctrine stating that digital platforms aren't responsible for what people
Problem
post.
is with
the results
those
of the case will
recommendations,
dictate
the
what's
AI,
allowed
right?
for
The
years
AI
to come,
learns
and will
what the
possibly
users
cripple companies like
search
Google and
terms
Meta.
are,
It
and
is
just
very clear
piece
to
what
everyone
they,
in the tech world
like,
that 2023
interested,
is going to
so-
be the true test for these tech giants. And so far, only a week into the year, and Amazon is already shedding 18,000 more jobs, with more cuts expected in the next few months. It should be clear by
Wow.
now that it's going to be a very rough year for Silicon Valley, and only time will tell whether they're ever going to be the giants they once were.
Nice. That is mad. That is mind blowing. It's like, when you think about everything, right? It's just like, wow. Because if all the big tech company collapses, then it's insane. Because what's gonna happen in the future, right? Because like the whole US is control. The economy depends on these companies, and like even the S&P 500 is part of like all of these tech companies are part of the S&P 500, and the whole economy depends on that. And if anything happens, then US could like fall off, right? So yeah, and if US fall off, and I don't know what else is gonna happen since all the tech companies based in there. And yeah, I don't know what else to say, but yeah, hope you enjoy. Make sure you smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm, and please consider subscribing. See you next time. Bye.